Good afternoon, everyone. I know that many families are having fun traveling, but those of you who chose to remain, I don't know whether you chose to remain or you just couldn't go away for whatever reason. It's so good to see all of you here. It's so hard to dress up these days, right? It's like cold in the morning, so I had a jacket on and then I had to take it off. And I was telling Daniel he's wearing shorts and short sleeves and but that's a good thing because today, after service, guess what we have? Cleaning day. So I hope to see all of you stay after. If many of you stay after, it'll be very short. We just gotta move the mulch. I don't know if you saw the pile of mulch outside. We just gotta move that on top of the garden that we have. So it'll be very quick. So please stay after. And then one note before I begin about the Passion Week. So not to go into too much detail, but I've been really wrestling whether to do the Passion Week prayer or not. And as a Korean American person who grew up in Korean church, this was a big decision for me because I almost felt guilty not doing Passion Week prayer. But the leadership and I, we're going through a stage where we don't want to just do meetings for the sake of meeting because we've been doing it. We want to be very intentional. And this year, we wanted to just give you some time for you to have your own personal week of meditating upon the sacrifice of Jesus. So we'll focus on Good Friday and Easter celebration. But for this week, tonight, I'll send out a devotional. If you want to use that, you may choose to use it. It will kind of take you through the events that happen leading from tonight to Good Friday. So feel free to use it in addition to your devotionals. But that's why we chose not to have it. So I just wanted to share that. But today, I'll continue in our study through Exodus. So today, I'll be talking about Pharaoh. We see this name a lot in the Bible. We'll talk about his opposition and the 10 plagues. Okay, so last week, if you weren't here, just to recap, we saw how Moses was called by God. He had this moment when he was called by God at the burning bush, and he was called by God to go deliver God's people. After a long, and when I say long, it was a long back and forth conversation with God, he reluctantly obeyed God's calling to become his instrument to deliver God's people out of Egypt. So what we see here today is that finally he mustered enough confidence and boldness to go to Pharaoh and do everything God told him to do. And so the question is, then what's going to happen? And we'll find out today. That's where we pick up chapter 5 of Exodus, verse 1. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." And Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Skip down to verse 6. That same day, Pharaoh gave this order to the slave drivers and overseers in charge of the people. "You're no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw, but require them to make the same number of bricks as before. Don't reduce the quota. They are lazy. That's why they are crying out. Let us go and sacrifice to our God. Make the work harder for the people so that they keep working and pay no attention to lies." Verse 15, then the Israelite overseers went and appealed to Pharaoh. "Why have you treated your servants this way? Your servants are given no straw, yet we're told, make bricks. Your servants are being beaten, but the fault is with your own people." Pharaoh said, "Lazy, that's what you are, lazy. That is why you keep saying, 'Let us go and sacrifice to the Lord.' Now get to work. You will not be given any straw, yet you must produce your full quota of bricks." The Israelite overseers realized that they were in trouble when they were told, "You are not to reduce the number of bricks required of you for each day." And when they left Pharaoh, they found Moses and Aaron waiting to meet them. And they said, "May the Lord look on you and judge you. You have made us obnoxious to Pharaoh and his officials and have put a sword in their hands to kill us." I know I skipped around a couple verses here to save time, but you see what's happening here. After struggling to obey God, Moses finally, reluctantly said yes to the Lord, and he made his way to go meet Pharaoh. He did exactly what he was told to do. And guess what happened? He faced opposition. His obedience leads to more opposition, more trouble. As we saw here, Pharaoh resisted, and there was a negative impact on God's people. Because of Moses and what he said, his people had to work harder. They were beaten. The oppression got harder and harsher. And we saw in verses 20 and 21 where people came and they called them out. Why are you doing this to us? Did we ever ask you to save us? Why are you making our lives miserable? So they blamed and criticized Moses for causing more trouble on them instead of appreciating Moses for coming to the rescue. Think about that for a second. Because I think oftentimes and not, when we obey God, this is what we experience. What we want is when we say yes to God, that everything will be a smooth sailing. But what we see often in the Bible is actually the opposite. Despite God's calling and clear calling and obedience, Moses faced many troubles. Perhaps resistance from Pharaoh was understandable, but even from his own people, questioning him, questioning his motive. What would you do if you're Moses? Forget you. I went through all the trouble to come and help you, and you're accusing me? Doesn't that make you scratch your head and wonder why? Why you face troubles and hardships when you're simply doing everything God has commanded? Why can't God remove all the difficulties and troubles so that you and I can just have a smooth sailing in everything that we do? But as you and I know, we've heard a phrase that goes something like this: it gets worse before it gets better. And oftentimes that is true in the Bible, and oftentimes that is also true in our own lives. And it seems like that's what's happening here with Moses and God's people. Right away, perhaps what Moses wanted was he goes and he says this one sentence, "Let my people go," and then God's gonna just take care of everything. Snap his finger and the freedom will come. But it wasn't the case. Although this is not a general rule that applies to every situation in life, it is a common pattern that you and I experience every day when we attempt to bring positive changes or try to follow God's vision. You know, my wife has been telling me or demanding me to eat healthy, and I don't want to do it. Why? Because it's painful. But I know it gets worse before it gets better. But all kidding aside, there was a person named Hudson Taylor. You may know him. He's a well-known missionary, legendary missionary, who went to China in the 19th century, who later established a well-known mission organization called Inland China Mission, which is known now as OMF. And this is what he said: there are 3 stages in any great work attempted for God. First, impossible. Second, difficult. And the last stage is done. Impossible, difficult, and done. And I don't like that. And when you study the life of missionary Taylor, before he established this organization of many, many missionaries, he faced so many difficulties in the process, including physical attacks, emotional pain and burden, financial challenges, and the loss of loved ones. He lost family members to pursue God's calling. He was persecuted and attacked by the very people he was trying to help and serve. When he went over to China, do you think they welcomed him with open hand, open arms? No. They attacked him. They questioned him. What are you trying to do here? What kind of weird teaching are you bringing? Who is Jesus that you're talking about? Isn't that the common story that we hear from the missionary stories? Not only that, he was also criticized by his home country because the mission work that he was doing in China was actually causing some political tension between China and England. No wonder he lays out the 3 stages of God's work as impossible, difficult, done. And I think that's what we see here in the story of Moses. Trouble and tension everywhere. Perhaps what we want, and when we attempt impossible mission, we want to go from impossible to done. And we want to skip over that difficult part. But I'm here to tell you, as much as I don't like it, as much as you don't like it, we must go through the middle part of the difficult season. Many, many difficult seasons to get to where you can finally say, done. And the thing about that is, we don't say when it's done. God does. When He says, well done, my faithful servant. What Moses was called to was mission impossible. And the mission that you and I are called to do is also mission impossible. And we cannot skip over difficult part. So let's look at how Moses responded to these oppositions and troubles and discouragements that he was facing. First, you know what he does? He goes to God. He goes to God. And these are the words that he said to the Lord. Verse 22 and 23 says this in chapter 5. Moses returned to the Lord after hearing from the people, after being rejected by Pharaoh, after being accused by the people. He comes to the Lord and said these words. Why, Lord? Why have you brought trouble on these people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on this people, and you have not rescued your people at all. Does that sound like a complaint? Of course it is. Does it sound like a man who's frustrated? Because he's simply doing what God told him to do, and yet he's still telling God, I did my part, but why aren't you doing your part? I went and spoke the words that you told me to speak, but why aren't you rescuing the people? Why aren't you working? Is this why you sent me? Perhaps Moses, like all of us, he was dealing with false expectation of how God would work when he obeyed God. Perhaps in his mind, all he had to do is to go speak, and then somehow God would just do his magic. And that was his expectation. Now what God said, because God already told him that things will be difficult. Back in chapter 3, when God was having this conversation back and forth with Moses, this is what God told Moses in verse 19 and 20. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them. After that, he will let you go. Just like most of us, Moses conveniently ignored and had forgotten about God's warning because somehow he thought this calling that God had given him will just work out smoothly. And I think oftentimes the reason why we get so discouraged when we face difficulty in our journey with God is because of this false expectation. We want God to do things our way. When God clearly said, I will show my power, and when I work, after I'm done, He will let you go, let them go. I believe Moses' training was not done. Perhaps he thought, leaving wilderness and going back to palace, he thought, now I'm ready to tackle big problems. But you know what? His training was ongoing. God was constantly asking him to trust God and surrender his will and his plan to God, his expectations, his dreams. But one thing I love about Moses that sets him apart from many of us and many others in the Bible is that he always brought problems and troubles to the Lord. As you study through the book of Exodus, you will see many instances where people challenge Moses. And you know what he does every time? He runs to the Lord. He complains to the Lord. He lays it out before the Lord. Sometimes he complains, he accuses God. Sometimes he deals with God. He intercedes on behalf of people with God. He did not go around looking for answers from people. But as the Bible tells us often, Moses fell on his face in the presence of God. People of God, what do you do when you face troubles? How would you go about solving your issues? Do you run to God? Or do you turn to other things? We will see throughout the journey of wilderness that Moses does the same thing. Perhaps this was another training for him for the journey ahead. For him to know that he can come to God and be honest with his feelings. Don't you love that? That he's literally accusing God Almighty, who could literally just strike him dead. And yet God allows him to complain and be honest and pour out all his thoughts and pains in his presence. Brothers and sisters, you can do that with God too. God gave us the right and access to go to Him, to speak to Him. Just imagine what was happening as Moses fell on his knees, not knowing what to do, not knowing what to say, just expressing the pain of his heart. God was listening, responding to him. No wonder Exodus chapter 33 verse 11 says Moses was a friend of God. A friend of God. That's how close he was to God. No other person is described as a friend of God. And you wonder why. How did Moses get there? I believe these moments got him to be that close with God. Someone who had a very intimate relationship with God. Probably the only person who had face-to-face interaction with God. And you know what God does after hearing the complaints and frustration from Moses? He reassures him. He responds to him. This is what it says in chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. Then the Lord said to Moses, "How dare you challenge me?" He didn't do that. "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country." And God also said to Moses, "I am the Lord." Don't forget, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob as Almighty. But by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself fully known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan where they resided as foreigners. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I have remembered my covenant. God is once again reminding him of his heart, his calling, what he will do. So therefore, he says, "Say to the Israelites, I am the Lord. and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. And I will bring you to the land I swore to the uplifted hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession, because I am the Lord. How many I ams, how many I wills does God have to say to reassure Moses that he will do it? And today, for those of us, maybe for all of us who are struggling to believe in God's power and His faithfulness, God is reminding us, Brian, I will do it. I said I will do it, and I will do it. So trust the process. Persevere. I know people are going to accuse you. I know Pharaoh will continue to reject you, but persevere. Stick with the plan. That's is literally what God does. Moses is here. God, they're not listening to me. But He's telling him again, go tell them to release my people. He literally gives them the same command. What is He trying to do? He's trying to teach Moses to be persistent in his obedience. Not to look to Pharaoh for his approval. Not to look to the people that he serves for their approval, how they respond, but look to God, to His promise. Because our calling can't depend on people's response. How often do you face complaints, oppositions, even in your own walk with the Lord? People may not appreciate you. People not always say thank you for all the wonderful things that you do for them. But don't look for those things. But look to me. I will reassure your calling. Moses probably wanted to quit. Is this why I told you that I can't speak? Why did you have to put me in that place? I don't want to do this anymore. But you know what? This moment became a crucial moment for Moses because, guess why? For 40 years in the wilderness, Moses had to deal with people who did not appreciate his leadership. We know that, right? In the wilderness, every time something happens, they would accuse Moses. Why did you bring us here? When our lives back in Egypt was so much better. Was it? How can you say such things like that when He was the one, an instrument used by God to deliver you out of enslavement? And yet, when they were thirsty, they complained. When they were hungry, they complained. Even his own sister and his brother one time tried to go against him. Do you think God knew what He was doing? By training him early on to trust in the Lord, to be ready to deal with all the discouragements ahead. I think God knew what He was doing. So today, if you are in that season of difficulty, know that God is in the midst of it, with you, to teach you, to train you for all the wonderful things that He has in store for you. But you know what's crazy? Even after all this, when you read down to verse 9 of chapter 6, so he's like, okay, fine, I'll go again. He goes, you know what happens? It says, Moses reported this to the Israelites, but they did not listen to him because of their discouragement and harsh labor. Again and again and again. And Pharaoh didn't listen to him. Chapter 7. This tells us we cannot convince everyone to get the support of everyone when we do God's work. It would be ideal to have everyone to support you, to have 100% support. And I'm not saying that when leaders say something that you have to obey, this is not what I'm trying to say. But oftentimes, we do not have to get everyone's votes or support to do God's work, because it will never happen. We have to expect challenges. We have to expect complaints, doubts, and some may even fall away. That's why God had to reassure Moses of the calling and the mission, so that he does not base his confidence and conviction on the responses and the result. And then we move on to chapters where we see the 10 plagues. What is God trying to do? What is God trying to accomplish through these 10 plagues? And the answer is very simple. God is making himself known. God is making himself known. And there are a lot of things that we can talk about for each plague. Why God brought such plague to the people here. Well, there are 3 things I'll talk about here in the bigger picture perspective. I believe through 10 plagues, God is making himself known first to his people, to his own people. Second, to Pharaoh and the Egyptians. And let me give you some example of some verses of why I think that. Exodus chapter 6, verse 3 and 7 says this. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac and Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself fully known to them. So apparently, people did not fully understand who God was. And by the plagues that he's about to bring, he's going to teach them, this is who I am. To make himself fully known to his people. Because it says this in verse 7, I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out. Again, Exodus chapter 8, verses 22 and 23. This is during the plague as is happening. On that day, I will deal differently with the land of Goshen where my people live. No swarms of flies will be there, so that you will know that I, the Lord, am in this land. I will make a distinction between my people and your people. Time and again, God makes a clear distinction. When the lights went out and went complete dark, guess who had lights? God's people. When the flies came, when the gnats came out, guess who suffered and who didn't? God's people did not suffer, but the Egyptians did. Was God making a clear message to his own people? Know that I am your God. What about to Pharaoh and the Egyptians? Chapter 7 verse 5 says this. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it. Chapter 8, verse 10, Moses replies to Pharaoh and says this, it will be as you say, so that you may know there is no one like the Lord our God. God wanted to reveal who he was, who he is to Pharaoh. And through the plagues, he's making himself known. Chapter 8, verse 19, the magician said to Pharaoh, now people are actually recognizing what God is doing. And this is what they said. This is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart was hard and he would not listen. Chapter 9, as the plagues continue to progress, this is what Pharaoh does. Pharaoh investigated and found that not even one of the animals of the Israelites had died. Remember one of the plagues? God struck the livestock. And then Pharaoh kind of saw the pattern, so he actually sent out people to investigate. Is it just happening to our people and not to God's people? And he realized that was the case. But it says, yet his heart was unyielding. Chapter 9, verse 13. Then the Lord said to Moses, get up early in the morning, confront Pharaoh and say to him, this is what the Lord, the God of Hebrews says, let my people go so that they may worship me, or this time I'll send the full force of my plagues against you and your officials and your people, so that you may know that there is no one like me in all the earth. For by now I could have stretched up my hand and struck you and your people with a plague that would have wiped you off the earth. But I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might show you my power, that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. And hear these responses of the officials of Pharaoh, verses 20 and 21. Those officials of Pharaoh who feared the word of the Lord hurried to bring their slaves and their livestock inside. But some people ignored. Do you see what God is doing? Pharaoh's officials and God's people, they're starting to notice the pattern of what God is doing and recognizing that God is behind what's happening. So they say to Pharaoh in chapter 10, verse 7, Pharaoh's officials said to him, how long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go so that they may worship the Lord their God. Do you not yet realize that Egypt is ruined? Everyone was recognizing the hand of the Lord, but not Pharaoh. Remember the passage that we read in the beginning, chapter 5? Initially, when Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, let God's people go, this is how Pharaoh responded. He said, who is the Lord that I should obey him? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. Through the 10 plagues, God made himself known. It's a clear message from the Lord saying, you don't know me? I'll make myself known to you. Let me show you who I am. That I am the true and living God. And this was so significant because at the time, Pharaoh and his family, they were considered to be gods. So when he say, who is this Lord? He's saying, I am God. What are you talking about? Who's above me? And as God is sending these plagues, God is confronting not only the false gods of the Egyptians, but he's confronting Pharaoh. That I am God. And to God's people, this was a display of God's power that reminded them of God's promise and their identity that they belonged to God. It was a loud and clear message as they witnessed God's protection. Just put yourself in their situation as you go through these plagues. It wasn't like a day. It was stretched out for many, many, many days. One after the other, they're recognizing, wow, our God is actually working. Do you think their hearts were being turned around? People who said, why are you causing more troubles on us? Moses, why are you doing this? We don't need to be rescued. Do you think God was turning their hearts around through these plagues? Of course he did. People who had doubts about God, their hearts were being turned around. The Egyptians and the officials, they're all recognizing God's hand. And as I wrap up, let me just share a couple lessons and takeaways from these 10 plagues. Again, you can go into so much detail on each plague and see what God was trying to do. But in general, I believe God was showing that He is above all these gods. That He was God of the economy. Remember when the Nile was turned into blood? Water was considered to be the source of everything. Water for human sustenance, livestock, agriculture. And water was what was fueling the economy of Egypt. That's why they had God of the Nile. They will worship the God like that. When God brought boils on people and attacked their health, God was proving himself, I am the Lord of your health. That he's God over provision. When the locusts came, and all these flies came and they ate up all the agriculture, God was proving to them, you think it's the gods of the sun and rain providing all this harvest for you? No. When God brought hail and storm, he was telling them, I am the God of the weather. With the light, when whole Egypt went dark, the significance here was that Pharaoh was actually believed to be the sun god, God of the sun, that shines bright. God was showing them who the God is of light. God proved that he is above all gods, including Pharaoh himself. I'll have the worship team come up. And by the 10th plague, it was the final plague, as many of you know, as the Passover, where God struck all firstborn of Egypt. God told the Israelites to sacrifice a lamb and smear his blood on the doorpost so the angel of death can pass over. And that's where you get Passover, right? So the angel of death will come, and when they see the blood smeared over the doorpost, he will pass over those houses. And the lives of the firstborns were spared. God was teaching the Israelites a deep spiritual lesson that pointed to Jesus Christ. That eventually, Passover will signify what was going to happen on the cross. That is through the blood of Jesus Christ that we get to live. Without the blood of Jesus Christ, we will have to face the judgment as well. And this 10th plague applied to everybody, including God's people. Until now, they were spared. They didn't have to do anything. And God protected them. God showed them that God who promised to rescue them. But for the 10th plague, Israelites had to obey and they had to act upon his words. And for those who are willing to believe, they had convincing evidence as they watched 9 plagues happen before them. They could choose to believe in the Lord, true and living God. Sadly, as we see, many still fail to believe. Many people died that day. But you might say, that's not fair. Is God really God of justice? Does he not love the Egyptians as much as God's own people? You know what? I believe God gave them a chance to come around. As you saw, the officials and the people, as they were bringing their livestock, knowing that God was doing something, I believe God was giving them chance to come to know him. He was patiently waiting for people to take that opportunity to come to know God and come into the family of God and turn away from idol worship and to turn to worshiping the true God. However, many people still reject it. And I think same applies today. God is being very patient. God is giving us a chance, giving many people a chance to come to know him. And yet, unfortunately, just like Pharaoh was stubborn, hardened his own heart, many people will reject him. So today, my challenge for all of us is, do you trust in the Lord that his plans are good? That what he wants to do is not only good for you, but it's good for the whole world. So again, just like God called Moses to a place of obedience and faith, God is calling all of us. You know why? Because this final act, final plague required an act of faith by the Israelites. And this is what God says, and after this we'll respond with a song and then wrap up. Exodus chapter 11 verses 1 to 3 says this. Now the Lord has said to Moses, I'll bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go from here. And when he does, he will drive you out completely. Tell the people that men and women alike are to ask their neighbors for articles of silver and gold. God already told them, when you go out of Egypt, you're not gonna go out as fugitives. You're gonna actually go out with God's provision. So Lord already made Egyptians favorably disposed towards the people, give them jewelries and all the things they needed to survive in their journey. But the people had to go and act on God's word. People had a role to play in this. It required faith on their part, just like Moses had to go to Pharaoh and act and do his part. On that Passover, all believers, all God's people had to act on faith. Sacrifice a lamb without blemish, and they had to paint the blood of the lamb on the doorpost. Oftentimes, you and I, we may think, God, why aren't you just doing everything for us? God wants to partner with us. God wants us to trust Him and then partner with Him in our obedience with Him. So today, I'm going to ask all of us to rise from your seats, if you're able. And as we sing this song and wrap up our service, we're going to sing, God, give us faith. Perhaps, once again, perhaps you're like Moses, struggling through, why God? Is this why you called me? Why do I have to continue to face difficulties? Perhaps this song can be a reminder to you that God is training you, helping you through the process. Maybe on the flip side, you might be like the people doubting God. But this is a moment when God is calling us to put our faith in Him, to trust Him, that we will go about sacrificing the animal, putting the blood on the doorpost, trusting that God will do what He said He will do. So with that, let's sing this song and then we'll wrap up our service together.